Hello tankers and pilots, it's Soulfax here, and welcome to another very overdue episode of War Thunder Weekly, a news show in which I go over and discuss all the new and horribly uninteresting things that happened around War Thunder this past week, or in this case 3 weeks. Needless to say, I'm horrible at sticking to a schedule, so much that I...
Insert bad joke about how bad I am at sticking to a schedule.
But I won't make any excuses, other than that life sort of caught up to me, and the circumstances were such that I just couldn't find the time needed to make War Thunder Weekly these past few weeks, for which I most humbly apologize. With that out of the way, I have to tell you that this episode covers the events of around about the start of July to the 23rd of the same month, so let's get on with the interesting part of this video. By some stroke of luck or genius, all of the interesting events that have happened during the course of the past month all happened just a few days ago, so this episode will contain some very up-to-date information. The first order of business, and the thing that I will be focusing most in this episode, is another proposed change to how bombers work in realistic battles, but this time it's not a spawning altitude change or a battle rating change, but instead Gaijin is planning on changing how the rearming mechanics works for bombers, or rather they're running a quote-unquote contained test of these changes. Where previously bombers had to navigate back to the nearest friendly airfield and land on it in order to be rearmed, much like every other type of aircraft in War Thunder, just recently Gaijin decided to test these reloading zones for bombers. As you can see from this rather uninformative dev blog of sorts, these reloading zones will be marked by small flags on your map and minimap. If a bomber is between 2,500 meters of one of these flags and maintaining a minimum altitude of 2,000 and a maximum altitude of 4,000 meters, a reload timer lasting 30 seconds will begin, much like what happens on airfield, just without the repair part of the whole process. Now you might be wondering, and rightfully so, why you didn't know anything about this test before watching this video. Why there was not a proper dev blog dedicated to such a major change, or at least an announcement on War Thunder's official page. And why the hell is this half-assed dev blog so shy when it comes to giving potential testers actual information about this test and how to partake in it? To that, I unfortunately don't have an answer. From what I can tell, the only mention of this test is in the Air Realistic Battles subsection of the official forum, which in turn means that if you don't frequent the forum, you probably didn't know about this test before watching this video. So geez Gaijin, what a great way of running a game mechanic test. I'm sure you guys will get plenty constructive feedback from the 200 or so people who are actually aware this is happening. Speaking of this quote-unquote test itself, these reloading zones appear, for now, on only one map, and that is Operation Ruger, and only in realistic battles. There are two ways to partake in this quote-unquote test. You can either queue up for the standard random air realistic battle and hope you get this particular map so, you can actually test this game-changing feature for yourself, or you can start a custom battle instead. If you're unsure how to start a custom match, pause the video and click on the annotation on your screen to watch a short tutorial that covers starting custom battles step by step. Now that you know how to join this very secretive test, let's talk about the feature itself. So like the post mentions, these zones are marked by flags on your map and minimap, and there's also an orange indicator floating in the air to mark where these zones exactly are on your screen. The radii of these zones is 2,500 meters, and the whole surface area in which the reload timer will take place is dotted out in a circle around the center of these zones. From the tests that I have run, these zones appear almost parallel to the main airfield and offset to the side by a few thousand meters. Now, to reload your plane, both ammunition and bombs, you must stay within the marked area for the whole duration of the timer. And if you leave the area for even 1 second, the reload timer will stop, and the minimum altitude at which the reload process will start is 2,000 meters, just like the original post said, and the same is true for the maximum altitude, which is 4,000 meters. But note, you can enter these zones at lower and higher altitudes than required, and depending on if you're too high or too low, you just need to climb up or dive down to the required altitude for the reload process to start. There is no need for flying out of these reload zones and getting to the required altitude for the reload process to start. You can adjust your altitude accordingly whilst in the zone. The only rule is that your plane needs to be between 2,000 and 400 meters for the reload timer to start. The altitude that you enter the reloading zone at is irrelevant. Another thing to note is that unlike when landing on airfields, these reload zones only resupply aircraft with ammunition and bombs, and only the exact loadout that you start the match with. Meaning that landing on friendly airfields is still the only way to change your bomb and ammunition loadout, and more importantly, repair your plane. Despite what the original post said, the reload times do differ from plane to plane, and they are not only 30 seconds. I haven't been able to pinpoint what exactly determines how long it will take for each different aircraft to reload, but I'll make an educated guess here and say that the bigger the aircraft, the longer the reload timer. For example, the Ju-87D5, which is strangely labeled as just a bomber in War Thunder, takes 50 seconds to rearm, but the Henschel 111HC, which is labeled as a medium or a frontline bomber, has a 60-second reload timer, and if we assume that this system scales logically, heavy bombers should take 70 seconds to reload, but I can't confirm this for the simple reason that, well, this test is not possible to recreate. A couple of days ago, more accurately on the 21st of July, loading up a custom realistic battle match on the Ruger map would just give you the old version of the map without the reloading zone. I don't know what's going on. I even messaged a forum mod about this, but he only replied saying that it's unknown why the reloading zones are not appearing, so yeah. Later, the same forum mod added that although reloading zones are not working in custom battles, they still do work in random battles, so yeah, there is a silver lining in all that stuff. But yeah, that's about it from the technical standpoint. Now we can discuss how the addition of these reloading zones will affect the game, because whatever you think about this feature so far, this is a big deal. This change has the potential to break War Thunder completely. On the surface, this change spells disaster for all fighter pilots, but when you think about it, not much will change for the majority of them. The biggest impact this mechanic will have is on Tier 4 and 5 vehicles. Low-tier bombers, especially German and British bombers, are just not very good, and are, with a few exceptions of course, not very fun or rewarding to play, and all low-tier bombers in general have very limited bomb loads with unremarkable defensive environments. Plus, they generally can't break even 400 km an hour, even at operational altitude, and combined with the low climb speeds and all the things that I mentioned already, I don't think this feature is going to have much of a negative impact on the lower tier bombers. Quite the contrary, I think. All low-tier bombers will benefit from this change immensely to very little detriment to the fighter side of things. At lower tiers, the possible addition of reloading zones brings a lot more to the table than it takes away. But at the late Tier 3, Tier 4 and Tier 5 matches, the addition of airborne reloading zones will break the game outright and cause a lot more problem than Gaijin might suspect. To put what I'm about to say in perspective, from my experience in simulator battles, the lengthy and long experience that I have in realistic battles, I came to the amazingly obvious conclusions that bombers are at their most vulnerable state when they're either going for a landing or trying to take off and climb to their preferred altitude. Just keep that in mind. Now, shortly after the last big update, Gaijin did away with the need for the initial takeoff and climb for all bombers, giving them all air spawns, which in practice, at least in my opinion, turned out pretty well for most bombers, with a few notable exceptions to Polar 4. I'm sorry. Now, this change gave bomber pilots the altitude they need to try and race ahead of their own team and avoid any intercepting fighters to drop their payload a lot easier than before. It made a lot of bombers a lot more fun to play, in my opinion. But getting back to these proposed reload zones. If these reloading zones are included, bombers wouldn't have to deal with the lengthy landing process. Cutting your throttle and slowly gliding down to the deck while trying not to break your own wings will be a thing of the past, and these reloading zones will also eliminate the need for a second takeoff and climb to altitude. In 2 strokes, assuming these reload zones do get added to every map, Gaijin would have rid the bombers of their 2 most vulnerable states, and thus making everyone's life a living hell. Okay, I might have overreacted there. Everyone's life a little bit harder. Heavy bombers like the B-29, the B-17 and the notorious Tupolev 4 are already pretty hard to take down effectively and safely. Most high-tier bombers are very fast at altitude, have frighteningly effective defensive environment, and have devastating bomb loads. So much that 4 Tupolev 4s or 4 B-29s, B-17s or B-24s can outright end a game in one pass if they actually bother to coordinate their bombing runs and their bombing targets. Now just imagine if these same bombers never have to land or take off unless critically damaged, ever again. Just imagine how faster they could fly across the whole map and nuke all the bases you thought you owned. How much easier it will be for a douche bomber pilot to climb to space, drop his bombs, and fly back to rearm without losing half of his altitude or initial speed. Now, I'm reluctant to even talk about jet bombers because, firstly, I don't own a single one, and secondly, the gap in top speeds and climb rates in Tier 5 is much less pronounced, and I just don't know how this feature could even work in jet battles, like, totally at all. It would completely break the balance and the consistency of every single match. With the addition of reloading zones, Bomber will be doing everything they have been doing for years now, but just a lot quicker and a lot easier, and that is not what this game needs. This game doesn't need another stupid mechanic that buffs one type of plane while disregarding what effects this buff will have on the rest of the game. Now, I've already dug deep into this hole, this shit show that is this test. I spent a couple of hours combing through the people's opinion on the official forums on this subject, looking for an explanation as to why this feature is even considered or needed in the game, and why this test is executed so poorly, and I might have came to a shockingly, frighteningly, kind of awesome conclusion. Now this next part is going to sound a little bit weird and a little bit unorthodox for me, because I'm going to be presenting you my honest opinion without any filters or anything. But firstly, you have to prepare your tinfoil hats, because what I'm about to say might sound a little bit paranoid and conspiracy theory-like, but it also kind of makes sense. So we all remember the last man standing feature and the debacle that mechanic was, and how the statistical majority of players wanted it removed from the game and not even introduced in the game in the first place, which Gaijin did eventually recognize after a couple of months of arduous and just the most annoying gameplay ever, sort of admitted to their own mistake and eventually removed it from the game, sending it back for further evaluation. I'm gonna take a wild guess here and say that someone at Gaijin took note of the overwhelmingly negative feedback the last man standing received, and the next time that they tried to introduce this kind of quality of life feature and shove it down our throats, Gaijin announced it well beforehand. The mechanic or feature in question, whatever you want to call it, are the proposed med packs, which were ultimately scrapped and again sent back to revision, much like Last Man Standing, but this time without the lengthy forced public test period, and again because of overwhelmingly negative player feedback. Cue the tinfoil hats. The reason Gaijin is quote-unquote testing this feature before release, and I'm using the term testing here very loosely because this can hardly be called a proper test, is because they got burned on the last two major quality of life features they tried to forcefully inflict upon our beloved game. And just think about it, all that development time spent for features that was so poorly received and eventually scrapped is a huge waste of time and money, and I don't even have to mention, but I will because I'm a douchebag, that someone's pride had to be hurt twice now, and so now they have presumably learned something from their past mistakes, and they have thought of a very nice little scheme, if I'm correct, which I'm probably not. I'm predicting now, on the 24th of July, that this feature will be introduced regardless of the results of this quote-unquote test, and that in the case of this feature tanking like Sega stock values in the 90s, Gaijin will point at this mockery of a testing period and claim the testers' feedback was either insufficient to prevent this feature from seeing the light of day, or the feedback was inconclusive due to so many people who just jumped on the opportunity to shit all over this proposed mechanic without testing it out first. And, still keeping your tinfoil hat on, you can kinda see this in the comments of the post that announced this testing period in the first place. Unfortunately, these same moderator that I praised in my last episode of War Thunder Weekly for his involvement with the same community and helping to make simulator battles a more interesting and fun environment for all of us, Hunter NZ, is now telling people that negative feedback without testing this mechanic out for yourself is unwanted and will be disregarded, which, in a perfect world, would be completely fair and totally okay, but this is not a perfect world, this is a world run by Gaijin, and where they're telling us that feedback will be disregarded if it's not feedback from personal experience, but you cannot actually fucking test this thing because it's broke. It doesn't work. If you load up a custom game with the correct map, the correct game with the correct settings, it doesn't work. This was told to me by Hunter NZ, and he tells me that it works in random battles, but who gives a shit? Am I going to go into my bomber and queue up for 20 random battles in a row just for the off chance of actually getting the map that I want to play on and testing this feature? No, fuck that shit. That is just so retarded and so stupid. This feature has the possibility to break this game completely, and yet they treat it like some sort of loose child who nobody cares about. They mention it so briefly in a place that nobody actually visits. There's like 200 people at most at one time at the forums, because this is War Thunder, not fucking World of Tanks, not fucking, I don't know, CSGO where there's 600,000 people playing every night. This is fucking War Thunder. You gotta make this public, not literally hide it in your forums that nobody ever visits. I apologize for the rant, I know I shouted a little bit, but I'm just done with this video. I just got so upset right now and I'm done with this video. This whole thing is one major shit show. I don't understand what Gaijin is doing, but if what I suspect is right, which there is a high probability that it's not right, but still the situation is fucked up, if Gaijin is planning on using this testing period as an excuse to force this feature onto the community, I will quit this game, because I will not be paying and playing for people and playing the game made by people who are such douchebags, who would stoop so low just to introduce a feature that is, I don't know, probably supposed to make bombers more competitive so they can, again, I don't know, sell more premium bombers or what? I just don't know what they're planning on doing with this, even if my outlandish suspicions are right. And I would literally quit this game if they are. But anyhow, that's all from me, folks. My name has been Soulfax. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hated making it. I will see you next week. Goodbye.